All right, here's a summary of today's lecture. You can pause it and take a look at it. I wouldn't copy it down word for word. And here's a list of things you need to be able to do after today's lecture. As we're going to be talking about regulating Atlantic trade, this is pages 79 to 81 in your book, but you can read that. So let's talk about colonial trade in the British colonies early on, before 1660, and it can best be characterized as limited involvement by the government. For the most part, the Crown and Parliament left the American colonies alone. They're not really involved in settlement. Settlement is done by private companies that are created for profit, or, as in the case in New England, created by religious dissenters who wanted to get out of England and worship on their own. The government had not helped with money. The government had not helped with the military. The reason being is that that would have been very, very expensive. And it was very expensive for Spain, who ran their colonies in that fashion. Also, remember, during the 1600s, the Crown of England, the King, and Parliament are fighting a power struggle that's eventually going to boil over to the English Civil War. And as a result of the limited involvement of the Crown and Parliament, the Dutch move in and really establish a trade relationship with the British American colonies during the English Civil War. During the 1640s, the Dutch are going to take advantage of that lack of British traders in the New World and start to trade with those English colonies. As a result of all this, Americans become used to a lot of economic independence. They get accustomed to having some degree of being able to do what they want and trade with who they want. So this all begins to change in 1660, but it actually started 10 years before, when Oliver Cromwell in 1650 takes control of England. He tries to regulate the colonies. But in 1660, when Charles II is put on the throne, when the crown is restored, he's going to really increase the control and regulation of the colonies. This is a direct example of mercantilist policies. One nation's success must mean another nation's failure. Mercantilism saw economics as a zero-sum game. This belief that if Spain's economy is good, that means England's economy must be bad. We know today that's not true, but at the time that was the belief. And England wanted to protect its markets from the French and the Dutch. And they also want a better balance of trade. They want to be exporting more and importing less. The king also wants more money. And if they tax trade in the New World, in the colonies, they can bring in greater tax revenues. The merchants of England need the support and need the help of Parliament, need the support of the British government, because they need to be able to compete with the Dutch. The Dutch have a strong fleet with a good relationship with the American colonies. The British merchants need regulations on the American colonies and restrictions on trading with the Dutch so that they can actually compete with the Dutch in terms of trading with the American colonies. Parliament realizes that England needs a stronger navy. And one way to do that is to improve the domestic shipbuilding industry. If they can better support merchants, there'll be more people building ships. If there's more people building ships, when England needs warships, those can be built much faster. So the Navigation Acts are first passed in 1660, or the first round of Navigation Acts is passed in 1660. And these are the most important British laws that are passed until after the French and Indian War in regards to the American colonies. And what they said was that only English or American ships could trade in the colonies. And they identified which goods were restricted. These were called enumerated goods. Some of the examples would be tobacco, sugar, and cotton. These goods, which came from the colonies, could only be sold to England. Couldn't be sold to the Dutch, couldn't be sold to the French. They eventually added to the Navigation Acts, saying that nothing could be imported into America without it first going through England. So if you want to buy something from French merchants, they have to first go through England, which means higher prices for American colonists. And in many areas, the Navigation Acts were successful. They cut the Dutch out of trade with the American colonies. But New England merchants become the rivals of British merchants. Remember, the Navigation Act said only British or American ships can trade in the colonies. So the New England shipping industry is going to grow as a rival to British merchants. In different parts of the colonies, there were different reactions. Virginia voiced strong opinions against these. They protested these higher tax, and they pointed out that the higher taxes led to less profit. They also pointed out that the fact that they couldn't trade with the Dutch meant that they couldn't get the best price for their goods, like tobacco. And these problems hurt small farmers much more so than plantation farmers. Throughout the colonies, merchants and other people found loopholes in the law. They found ways to get around the law. They found ways to smuggle. And they sold enumerated goods to the French and to the Dutch. So the third round of Navigation Acts puts a tax at every port. This is a good idea, except it was very hard to enforce. Britain did not have enough tax collecting agents to really enforce this version of the Navigation Acts. The fourth round of Navigation Acts creates vice admiralty courts. These are naval courts that have no jury and don't allow for cross-examination. In other words, these are very speedy trials. These are not a jury of your peers, and these were used to convict merchants of smuggling. In 1678, the Massachusetts the Massachusetts Colonial Legislature declared that the Navigation Acts were not valid in their colony and that they do not need to follow them. This is one of the things that leads to the Massachusetts Charter being annulled by the English government in 1684. In 1686, when James II takes office, or takes the throne, he replaces that charter with the Dominion of New England, where the king is going to appoint the governor and council. There'll be no colonial assembly, so there's no representation for the colonists. He places Sir Edmund Andros as the governor of the Dominion of New England. And soon, that region, the Dominion of New England, is going to stretch to this entire green area, all of New England, down to New York and New Jersey. So the colonists are really going to lose power, or they're going to lose that power to approve the taxes that England passes. Town governments are shut down. Smugglers are strictly punished in the Dominion of New England. They even took over a Puritan church in Boston and converted it into an Anglican church. This is really going to tick off people in the Massachusetts Bay Area. With the Glorious Revolution, James II is deposed and Andros is no longer in charge, and the Dominion collapses. All of the Dominion colonies revert to their former government. Massachusetts and Plymouth at this time are merged into one colony known as Massachusetts. So by 1700, there are a large number of British exports that were actually American exports. So in other words, Britain was selling things to the rest of the world that were actually coming from the Americas as a result of the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts mean that there's virtually no smuggling anymore in America either, at least for a little while. There are high profits for English shipbuilders and English merchants, and the American colonies become even more important to the British Empire and its economy.